Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest episode of our entertainment show. Each week we start to preview on air a special sequence of our show. It's called Into the Vault movie series, where we look at old cult classic type movies back through the genres, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, from all different aspects, whether it be action, movie, romance, sci-fi, a romantic action movie, a romantic thriller, basically a futuristic sort of movie as well. And this week we've delved into the world of Vin Diesel, and one of his most prominent roles, Vin Diesel, was the character Riddick. He appeared as Riddick in 3 different movies, but it's the second one we're looking at now in terms of the sequel to the original. It was called the Chronicles of Riddick, and it felt an all-star cast, including Vin Diesel himself, Alexa Davalos, who played Kyra, Thandiwe Newton, who played Dane Vacco, Karl Urban, who played Vacco, Judi Dench, who played Aaron, Keith David, who played Iman, Colm Feore, who played the Lord Marshal, and the one and only Linus Roache, who was our special guest this evening, who played the role of the Purifier. And first of all, Linus, great to have you on this evening. Great to be discussing all things Riddick with you in terms of the sort of sci-fi genre that was the fictional character Riddick. And just looking down and the scroll of all that names, it's no wonder the movie was such a massive success, given that all-star cast. So the list of names just speaks for itself that we just sort of listed up there.
Well, James, from my memory, at the time, the movie wasn't such a big hit. I don't think it critically got very well received. It didn't do amazing box office, but it was one of those sleeper movies that over time, it gained more and more momentum. It just kept playing, and and I got more people saying, "Oh, I saw you in Riddick. I saw you in Riddick," like years down the line. So it's one of those stories where a movie has a life after its initial opening. And I was glad to see that happen. But yeah, at the time, my memory was, it was sort of so-ish, you know. I don't know, maybe you have a different take on that, but that's what I remember.
Well, Linus, in terms of the original Riddick movie, which was sort of pitch black, it was delved into, say, for this horror type sort of story. While this, obviously, it's more detailed and depth in terms of there's so many different elements to this sort of story, so many different sort of characters, so many different sort of takes to this sort of universe in terms of Riddick as well. So obviously, it's the terms of the richness of the storyline, obviously, that has which appealed to people as years gone on, in terms of that it's not only it's not a horror movie as such, it's right. Such action, thriller, sci-fi. There's a different elements to it. While maybe Pitch Black was Riddick wrestling with aliens they were just going to basically try and kill him, really. This is more in-depth sort of storyline where we've seen different worlds, different sort of empires sort of colliding as one, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hadn't seen Pitch Black before I got involved in the project. Obviously, I did watch it, but as well as you're speaking about the different, slightly different genre with Pitch Black, it also was a completely different budget. But because that movie was so successful, I think Vin and David Toohey, they sort of had almost a carte blanche to kind of go out and really create whatever they wanted. So I'd done maybe 1 or 2 other Hollywood bigger budget movies, but this was by far the biggest thing I'd ever been on. And I couldn't believe the scale they were reaching for. You know, just the sets alone, they blew your mind. I mean, they were real builds of that inside of that massive ship, you know, where Colm Feore was the
attention to detail, really. It was just
incredible. And it, you know, and all the extras and the costumes, it was enormous. And I'd never been involved in something like that, but it also was something that Vin seemed to be very creatively involved in. And I know he was a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, and it was almost like they were taking the premise of the character Riddick and the world that they created and then going, well, we can do anything we want. It's a whole big universe out there. And they were kind of creating some of it as we were going, a little bit. I have to say, there were conversations sometimes on set that would blow your mind, because you're like, really? We're talking about how do you get to the underverse now, and we're just about to shoot the scene. So yeah, it was quite a trip, actually, being involved in that project.
And I suppose, Linus, in terms of the opportunity Is there a good story how you came about to be involved in Riddick and landing the role as the Purifier? Or was it just one of those normal sort of audition sort of process where talent agent recommend you sort of this role coming? I had a look at the script. They said, yeah, I might try my eye out, see interesting sort of readers. Is there a unique sort of story behind it? Was it luck brought you upon this project?
I wouldn't say it's that unique, but it is a little bit out of the ordinary in that sometimes, I went to meet David Twohy, I think it was in London. And I can't remember if I read the whole script at that point or if they were keeping it secret. I must have read enough of it, but I had a meeting with him and I was meeting to play Vaco.
Okay, Karl Urban's character, yes.
Exactly. And so we were having a chat and very quickly David said, I don't see you as Vaco. He said, but there's a role in this that I think you could be good at. It would be very interesting. And he mentioned the Purifier. And then cut to maybe a month or 2 months later, I just happened to be in LA for something else. And it came round again, they'd like to meet you again. And I happened, and David was in LA and I was in LA. And I think had I not been in LA, I might not have got the job, because it was one of those things where I went in, met him, did a little test on camera for the role. We talked about it and that was it. I was kind of signed up straight away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Linus, in terms of knowing, obviously, you knew Vin Diesel was obviously involved in the project and tag, but when did you hear the likes of, say, Keith David, Colm Feore and Judi Dench, obviously an iconic actress, that they were all obviously pitching? Were they recruited before you were recruited?
I think he might have managed to get Judi. There's a famous story how he managed to convince her. He went backstage in the West End and just basically charmed her until she said yes.
Okay.
I think Judi was on board, Karl was on board, but I don't know about Keith. It was all sort of, I was cast around that time that the whole package was coming together. And then I was flown out to Vancouver and I just was, just again, to do with the scale of it, arriving there and going to David's apartment and then to the studio and the amount of work that was going into creating the world and the costumes and the prosthetics and they were doing casts of us all. And it was just, there was so much detail going on around it that it was pretty amazing to sort of enter, if you like, their vision of what they were trying to achieve.
And obviously you mentioned British Columbia and you mentioned Vancouver, and it's probably the world home of sci-fi. If you think of some of the sci-fi series that have come out of there, the likes of Battlestar Galactica, the likes of Stargate, cult classics known all over the world, and they have expertise in terms of doing those sorts of projects as well. So in terms of British Columbia, obviously they went to places that studios are all too sort of familiar with sort of creating this out of this world type sci-fi sort of out of this world type universes, these fictional sort of characters. And when you walked, how big was the sort of lot that you were sort of shooting on? Was it sort of, were you out in the wilderness out in British Columbia?
No, we were, it was not far out of the city or probably within the bounds of the city. And I do remember that it was an old Sears warehouse, which is a massive, was that they had converted, and it was enormous. And so these sets, honestly, you get lost walking around all the different sets and the different studios that they sort of, partitioned out areas. It was just the builds alone, the scale of it was just mind-blowing. And then the way it would shoot, I haven't been on anything like it since. You'd start on a Monday on a regular hours, but you'd always go over. And then by the Friday, you were coming in because of the time, and they have to give you your turnaround as an actor so that you get enough sleep. We'd be going in at sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon and coming out at 6, 7 in the morning. So it was just like, this thing felt to me like a bit of a behemoth that was out of control, and sometimes they didn't quite know what to do and they'd chuck a bit more money at it. And it was that kind of thing that was going on. And my big death sequence and the scene before it, we spent like 4 or 5 hours discussing it before we even shot. That's whilst we're supposed to be shooting. We were just talking whilst the whole crew's just drinking coffee and eating sandwiches. And eventually we shot something. And then 6 months later, I get a call saying, you know, we want to reshoot it. We've got a different idea of what we want to do. So it was like, you know, you don't get involved in projects like that often anymore because people can't afford to do them. But it was something kind of amazing about it as well, because they were really creating some of it as they were going along. You know, it wasn't all like it's not like doing Lord of the Rings where you've got an amazing book to work from. This was a world that they were still figuring out, well, what fits and what doesn't. And so it felt kind of, and Vin, as I say, was very involved in all of that, which is, you know, amazing, because he really was quite a leader in the whole thing, and he had a great passion for it.
So obviously Vin had a big sort of role in scenes that even weren't involving him, even though he was probably a central sort of character throughout the sort of movie. And we all know the famous lines, death by teaspoon and death by the sort of pin sort of nib, the pin needle, as the saying goes, was the two sort of sequences in that sort of story. But in terms of, you mentioned your own sort of death scene, and obviously it's sort of, dare I say, it's sort of sci-fi Trillic blind, where you're sort of being melted by in 1,000 degrees. You're just walking out to your sort of death, and you obviously become like this sort of flesh-eating sort of mummy that sort of disappears before our opening eyes. In terms of that, in terms of seeing that for the first time back, obviously you obviously mimic those sort of roles, you got ideas of it, but when you saw it on the with the 3D screen and the green effects, were you still sort of taken by surprise in how sort of graphic it looked?
Well, I kind of knew it was going to be pretty graphic, and I remember I did go to the premiere in LA and saw it on a big screen and got to see, you know, what they'd really done with the movie, and I was just so impressed with the epic nature and scale of the piece. It was almost like space opera or something, and as you know, it was ambitious from the beginning, and I think that's probably why the movie has had some longevity and people still like it and watch it, and it's part of a pantheon of those stories now. But yeah, it's got a lot going on, and it doesn't answer everything as well. So I think what they were looking for in the design kind of met the artistic concept of the whole piece. It was very, very ambitious and brave and bold. Yeah.
And Linus, in a cast full of testosterone, I suppose, Alexei Davalos had this prominent sort of character playing Kira. Obviously, she was the weakness of, say, Riddick. He's sort of kryptonite. If you could get at Riddick, you could get at him through sort of Kira in terms of his sort of fondness. But obviously she had to make herself stand out in this sort of movie, in this cast, obviously, as we said, rich and sort of testosterone sort of driven in that. And was she very much a playful, colourful actor in between sort of takes and sort of scenes? Was she good to get on, and was she good?
Yeah, I didn't, obviously, because I was in, you know, a slightly separate world, so I didn't get to spend a lot of time with her, but I just remember her being absolutely delightful and so much fun. And I know that her and Vin were really tight, and there was this sense of camaraderie, and they were just really enjoying making the movie. And she's one of those, I remember she physically was throwing herself into it in a big way, but she was also just very I just remember her being very generous and very sweet, you know. So I mean, Vin, you know, I don't know what he's like now. I've not seen him since, really. I did one more movie with him after that, actually, a very low budget film with Sidney Lumet. So it was kind of interesting for me to work with him in a completely different context, you know, totally different. But, you know, he was a great leader, and he was a great lead actor because he really loved this story. He really wanted to tell this story, and he wanted everything and everyone to be as good as they possibly could be. So, you know, he had a lot to do with bringing, if you like, that that creative joy that allows people to bring their best. And Vin actually had a big hand in doing that.
Yeah. And Linus, one character that you did spend an awful lot of time with on set in terms of your storyline with Riddick and Purifier was obviously the Lord Marshal's character, Colm Feore, an absolute legendary actor as well. And Colm and you sort of, it was almost like this. He was the bad boss, and you were that sort of, let's say, that that sort of snake or that sort of traitor hiding in between his sort of wings that he sort of didn't know. As I said, you're the closest, your best friend is can be your bestest of enemies as well.
Yeah, Colm is a dear man and such a brilliant actor. And we had me and him, I was very happy that we were tied together. Is a little bit of a double act at points, and we share a great love and passion for the theatre and for Shakespeare. So we'd have these Shakespeare kind of almost rap battles on set where he would blast off a whole bit of Shakespeare and I would counter with a whole bit of Shakespeare. It would entertain people, and we had a lot of fun. And Colm's just very kind of he's extremely present. You know, he's one of these people. He's just right there in the thick of it and right with you. So I loved him, and he made me laugh so much. I mean, he's got that little twinkle in his eye where, you know, he's committed to the work, but at the same time, he's kind of going, this is a bit daft, isn't it? We're all dressed up in silly costumes, pretending we're in outer space, but we're having a good time. So he just brought that kind of sense of joy and fun to it.
And Linus, do you actually love the sort of sci-fi universe, the sort of fictional sort of movies? And obviously it takes you as an actor in terms of places that obviously that are unique and obviously bestowed to the human eye. And obviously it creates that imagination. You almost have to, I imagine when you're on set, when you're sort of playing those movies, in your head, you're trying to create a picture of what it might actually look like in terms of TV screen, and to give you a sense of what it more feels like. Because obviously you're looking on and you're trying to create those sort of roles and those sorts of storylines, but you can't actually see the finished product until it's actually finished. So do you have to sort of create that inner eye, that sort of imagination sort of eye when it comes to fictional stories like this that are so out there?
Well, it's a good question, but I mean, just to say, I'm a big fan of sci-fi. It's one of my favorite genres. You know, I've watched and read loads of sci-fi stories, always wanted to be part of them, would love to be part of more. In terms of the belief, one of the great strengths of sci-fi, I think, well, it's true of any storytelling, is it needs to be grounded in something truthful and honest and real. So as long as the dynamics, they might be sort of otherworldly, but they've got to be relatable to in terms of us as human beings and our humanity. So often with sci-fi, you're able to play with really big, important earthly themes, you know, but you can deal with them sort of head on in this other world. But in terms of getting into the believability, I mean, I think that's why, you know, there was quite a lot of discussion at times on the set about, well, what's the actual logic of this? Does that, in our world that we've created, what are the rules of the world? And are we sticking to the rules? Because you can't break them. That will just send the audience off. But in terms of standing there and believing in it, when you've got a set that is literally that detailed, that well built, that you could stand like 1,000 people on it and it wouldn't fall down, and you've got these costumes on which the detail inside of every bit of fabric was really sort of very finely thought through, you sort of almost inherently believe in it. The tricky part is when you're looking at the green screen and there's nothing there and you've got to pretend something's there when it's not. That's just called acting. But the actual world of it that you're in felt very believable. And I also trust in the camera. You know, the camera, when you've got like really talented people shooting stuff like that, you kind of know that it's going to look pretty amazing.
And Linus, in terms of the Purifier, what was your sort of take when you read the script first of all, and what sort of character he was, and how did you want to sort of portray him? Was it almost like a priest type of character in terms of that sort of vibe, that he was a preacher, dare I say?
A preacher, a priest, a spiritual, if you like, leader. And I kind of based a little bit of the idea, that skull cap thing we came up with was, do you remember Excalibur that John Borman made?
Yes.
A brilliant film. And do you remember Nicole Williamson, amazing actor, playing Merlin in that? And he had this sort of silver plate on his head. There was a little bit of inspiration from him in that. But I suppose in terms of the character, I'm a great believer in, you know, what they write in what's written is what you kind of have to play. You want to go with it. But this idea of this because the reveal is that he was a Furian too, you know, like he's the same race as Vin, and that actually he's compromised himself for the sake of this, you know, the necromongers, whatever, you know, he's compromised his soul. So that was really the journey of the Purifier. Ends up ironically purifying himself through fire in the end by just sort of getting rid of himself, if you like. But yeah, that was the premise. He was the preacher, but he was, I think Vin actually came up with the line, which is a bit like a line in Blade Runner, that I've done terrible things in the name of a faith that was never my own.
Okay.
I remember Vin coming to my dressing room, knocking on the door, and I've got a great line. I've got a great line. And he chucked it at me, and I said, it sounds a bit like Blade Runner. He said, doesn't matter.
It's him, basically.
Yeah, and it was a true line. I've done horrible things in the name of a faith that was never my own. So that was kind of like the premise of the role.
And I suppose Linus, with every sort of movie, obviously there's loads of bloopers, there's loads of sort of retakes, sort of funny moments. Was there any sort of particular story from your time on the set of Chronicles of Riddick, where there was an interaction with another cast member, whether it was maybe Thandiwe Newton, Karl, Keith, Colm, Judi, whoever it was, that still makes you smile, still makes it laugh to this day when you think of that particular moment or that particular story?
There is one, but it's a bit rude, so I can't really do it on the podcast. But it was our friend Colm Feore, because he would just sometimes come out with some outrageous things whilst the camera was still running. And there was one, it's terrible as that. It was just basically a comment he made about one of the extras who was quite revealed, and it just cracked me up at the time. And he's just got a very quick wit and a very big voice, so he would crack me up every single day, Colin.
And obviously, if you're looking on now in terms of your sort of take on the Chronicles of Riddick, and obviously we're speaking about it now, roughly 10, maybe 12 years later. In terms of,
must be more, isn't it? When was it? Like 2006,
isn't it?
Is it 6?
Yeah, I think it's 2006. Yeah.
Okay,
so we're talking roughly
16
are we?
Years. Yeah.
16 years, yeah. 16 years later, Linus, in terms of its coming out, do you think there was... Do you say, obviously, it's, as you mentioned, it's evolved over time in terms of its sort of following, but do you think there's something, what you think maybe when people look at this sort of movie, that it still appeals to them even to this day, in terms of, is it just the depth that in terms of the movie, in terms of all different aspects, it tries to challenge, it takes on, it maybe it tries to take on too much, but in doing so, it gives so many different stories to it?
Do you know what? I as you were asking me this, I was starting to panic, going, what can I say? I don't got a good answer, but I think you've answered it for me. I think because it's not so micromanaged that they've worked every single beat out, and they, you know, and I'm not criticizing the Marvel movies, and sometimes they're amazing because of it, but it's like they've got it all right. In a way, Riddick was more like, we want it all, and we're going to explore it all. And it's too much, but sometimes it's good to have too much, and it's good when things aren't perfect, you know, when things aren't sort of like micromanaged to a T, that every moment's got to read. So it leaves a little bit of overwhelm and mystery and stuff to think about, and you're not being spoon-fed, if you like, you're supposed to think this now and feel this now. So you've got room to interpret it. So thank you. You answered the question for me. They gave us too much, and in that, I suppose, gave us a lot to rewatch and rethink and enjoy.
Yeah. And Linus, lastly, before I let you go, I know it's a busy time for you in terms of shooting other TV series, movies, maybe in the works in the pipeline. Is it very much back in full swing? And is there anything that we're going to be seeing on our TV screens, maybe in terms of movie screens, in terms of Linus Roache in the near future?
Yeah, well, actually, it's been I've got something out on Amazon right now called My Policeman, which came out about 3 weeks ago with Harry Styles. Beautiful story. But this year's been really fun, actually. I started the year doing a sci-fi, almost dystopian project that again, it's a really ambitious project, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes out. And then I did a movie that's coming out in December called The Apology with Anna Gunn, which is almost like a domestic / horror movie on Christmas Eve, just two people trapped in a house with a bad history. So that's coming out December. And then I've got this TV series for Showtime called Fellow Travelers, which they're still shooting. I finished my bit. That's coming out next year. So yeah, it's been a busy old time. Yeah.
And Linus, I know you're a big fan of Ireland. You spend many a time here shooting the Vikings, and no doubt, obviously, in the near future, you're going to be back here, maybe enjoying the Irish sights, the Cliffs of Moher, the Burn, maybe a pint of Guinness in the near future. Will we see you back on our shores?
Bring me back a pint of Guinness in Mulligan's or Grogan's or Brogan's. Anyway, I love Ireland. I mean, shooting Vikings there, it wasn't only just because it was a great show. It was because of where we shot it, and the crew were incredible. And I just fell in love, and I got to spend an enormous amount of time, mostly just outside Dublin and Wicklow. But I did get to travel around to your neck of the woods and, you know, get to really know and love and feel Ireland. And I just pray that something will bring me back. So maybe this interview will spark someone's interest and they'll give me another job in Ireland, because I do genuinely mean this. It's the only other place I felt that I could live. Okay. I've lived in Britain, and I've lived in the States, and it's kind of a bit of a crazy place to live right now, America. But if things go the wrong way in the next election, I might be knocking on your door to say, can you adopt me, please? And I'll become a citizen of Ireland.
Okay. Linus Roache, thanks for sharing your memories. Obviously, Into the Vault movie series. This week's movie in question, The Chronicles of Riddick, looking at the Vin Diesel 3-part movie series, the Riddick sort of franchise. Linus Roache, you played the Purifier in that role in The Chronicles of Riddick, alongside Alexa Davalos, Thandiwe Newton, Karl Urban, Judi Dench, Keith David, Colm Feore, and Vin Diesel themselves. Thanks for sharing your memories, your stories of the time on set. Obviously, the highs, the lows, the good points, the laughs, everything that involves in making such a big blockbuster Hollywood movie. But for the moment, Linus Roache, take care, stay safe, and God bless.
Bless you. Thank you.